Hello, I'm Brad Edwards. Thanks for joining us on the stream. Cops policing schools. It's a matter the CBS 2 investigators have been examining for years. What you're watching is the moment a high school student in Rockford was slammed to the ground, headfirst by a police officer. What led to this? He was skipping class. That student suffered a skull fracture and permanent brain damage. CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini will join us in a moment, but first, he investigates whether police officers should be policing schools.
I got out of the truck, I entered the school. The officer approached me and informed me that there was a little struggle. Paris had slipped and fell and hit his head.
A slip and fall is the story Diane Morgan got as she rushed over to the school her grandson, Paris Moore, was attending. It was just after 9 a.m. That's her in the pink shirt standing next to paramedics, along with police called student resource officers stationed at the 14-year-old's high school. She drove there immediately when she heard he was hurt.
What did you see when you got to the school?
When I got there, I seen my grandson sitting in a wheelchair, shaking so bad that it was just unreal.
It happened last year. Paris was just a freshman. It was the second week of school, and school security camera video obtained by the CBS 2 investigators shows as his grandmother arrives, he gets up out of a wheelchair, arms behind his back, both hands cuffed.
I was so angry that it just, I couldn't hardly take it. I was shaking myself. Shaken severely.
She had no idea of what really happened to Paris earlier that morning, or just how severe his injuries were. Take a look at the police officer in this circle. That's the school resource officer who had cuffed him earlier and now is uncuffing him. Diane gets emotional as her grandchild Paris is freed. He also wipes away tears.
The boy could barely even walk to my car. He was shaking so bad. I got him in the truck and proceeded to take him to the hospital.
She says he was unsteady. She could see some bruising on his body, and he complained of pain to his knee. But what was really hurting him was his head.
He was knocked unconscious?
Yes.
Paris's mother, Stephanie Moore, was also by his side.
They traumatized him for the rest of his life.
And when they finally saw these scans, three-dimensional images, they could see the source of his head pain, a skull fracture down one side of his head.
So there's damage to his brain?
Yes. Yes.
He could have instantly been dead just like that.
The family then started demanding answers from the school staff at Auburn High School in Rockford, where it all occurred.
They kept using the word struggle.
Right.
Did they tell you what it was about?
They just said that he was in the hall refusing to go back into his classroom.
Remember that student resource officer? He's the one who uncuffed Paris. His name is Bradley Lauer. He works for the Rockford Police Department. Diane says he's the one who told her there was only a little struggle before Paris slipped and fell.
But he told you it was a slip.
Right, right.
The family wasn't buying the cop's story or the school account of what happened, especially considering the size of the skull fracture. They demanded to see the school security video, so they hired an attorney. A month later, this video was finally turned over, showing what really happened. You can see Paris wandering the hallways when he was supposed to be in class. Then the assistant principal sees him and grabs him. Paris is trying to get away. That's when Officer Lauer takes over. He grabs Paris, and watch what happens next. There are two angles to this troubling video. Here's the first angle. Down at the bottom, he lifts Paris up and forces him headfirst into the hard school floor. Then this angle, you can see it more clearly. A head slam to the floor.
Would you describe that as a slip?
No. No, definitely not.
The 4'11", 140-pound teen was knocked out cold.
What was the most difficult part of watching that?
And my son laying there not being able to move at all.
Describe for me what you see in that video.
They're just digging through his pockets and he's just a limp body laying there.
Like there was no sense of urgency to get him help.
Right.
He has a traumatic brain injury as a result of this incident. He has permanent brain damage in the areas of memory, speech.
Al Hofeld Jr. is the family attorney.
This officer used a deadly kind of force to take Paris down and knock him out cold when that was totally unnecessary.
What could have happened to him?
I think it was millimeters or micrometers away from killing him.
That was excessive.
Very much so.
The CBS 2 investigators obtained federal data from the 2017-18 school year, the most recent year available. It shows Auburn High School referred students to police 72 times that year, resulting in 43 arrests. The data also reveals this Illinois school referred students more often to police than 94% of all other high schools in the nation.
I feel that there's a way better way to handle it than what they did.
So, in other words, this was more of a disciplinary thing versus a police call?
Yes. Yes, definitely.
She says this was a school disciplinary matter, not a police matter. And far too often, student resource officers are called in to deal with student behavioral issues, escalating situations instead of de-escalating. Like here in Chicago, where Denigma Howard was dragged down the stairs at Marshall High School for talking on her cell phone. She was repeatedly tasered and then charged with a crime. The charges were dropped when the video surfaced, and Chicago Public Schools settled a 6-figure lawsuit.
Is this how you pictured your son's freshman year starting?
Nope. Not at all.
Paris Moore also faced charges, but not right away. Not until 2 months later, after the family hired a lawyer to sue the district and police. The family calls that retaliation.
I think they thought they were going to scare somebody to back off, and it's not working.
This isn't an isolated incident. Some say it's a growing problem. Sworn police officers now policing schools, often known as resource officers. Problem is, regular school disciplinary matters are now becoming criminal matters because sworn officers, as opposed to security guards, are now manning the halls. Again, CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini will join us in a moment for a larger conversation. First, Dave's been looking into this for some time and did a report last year on similar issues happening in Chicago public schools. Hear that report.
All right, go, 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 go.
Watch as Chicago police respond to a violent altercation. At least a dozen officers head inside this building where it's all still unfolding. A 16-year-old girl is on the ground as 2 other police officers, already stationed in her high school, called school resource officers, or SROs, try to handcuff her.
I didn't deserve it.
It all started around 9:45 in the morning. Denigma Howard, a junior at Marshall High School in 2019, can be seen in a hallway as an officer approaches her over a disciplinary matter for having a cell phone out in school. School security video shows how things quickly escalate.
It caught me off guard at first.
What was he saying to you right at that moment when you turned away?
He was like, you either go to in-school suspension or you leave. And I walked away.
And then what did he do?
Pushed me down the stairs.
Denigma is grabbed by the officer and taken down toward the stairway. She goes down 1 flight of stairs as a second officer jumps in and then is dragged down the next flight.
'Cause I'm like, is this really happening?
What are you thinking at that moment as your body is going down the stairs?
I was just thinking, defend yourself. Defend, just make sure that you don't get hurt, or to make sure that you come out alive.
But then came more pain. You can see one officer with a yellow taser. He repeatedly fires it as another student records it all on a cell phone camera.
It was painful, mentally, emotionally, physically. It was embarrassing for me.
In a flash, Denigma Howard went from being a high schooler to being an accused criminal charged with multiple felonies.
Do you think if it was not caught on camera that you might be in prison today?
Yeah.
All over a cell phone.
Her father, Laurencio Howard, arrived as it happened. That's him in the blue jacket.
So you actually saw her get tasered?
Yes, and pulled down the stairs. The last landing, yes, I seen it.
What happened to Denigma Howard is just one of thousands of incidents the CBS 2 investigators have uncovered, involving CPS students getting referred to police each year for seemingly minor offenses.
They should have called her counselor, the one who deals with her and knows everything about her and how to deal with her when conflict arises.
Her father feels school staff are too quick to use police for what should be considered code of conduct or disciplinary matters, and if not properly trained, those officers can make matters worse.
Your daughter's going to jail.
They should be taught to know how to de-escalate a situation instead of escalating a situation.
We examined data CPS sent to the U.S. Department of Education. We found 7,700 Chicago public school students were referred to law enforcement during the 2017-2018 school year, the most recent year of data on file. We also found of the district's 457 schools, 26 chose to involve police the most, 4 times more than the district average for referring students to police.
It should be a wake-up call about SROs in schools because they're not trained to deal with teenagers, like I said, in schools.
Marshall High School was one of the top schools calling the cops on students. 43% of all Marshall students were referred to law enforcement that year.
Why do you think Marshall has so many cases?
They not specialized to help kids that got anger problems or that got like an IEP. That's why.
IEPs are individual education plans that provide special services or supports for struggling students. Marshall had 95 students with IEPs in the 2017-18 school year, including Denigma Howard. A whopping 44 of those teens, nearly half, were referred to police.
Do you think police officers should be in schools?
No.
Yeah, we're going to have an ambulance look at her.
The data also shows students with IEPs district-wide were referred to police 3 times more often than all other students.
Wire cutters, Jimmy?
EMS crews had to be called to Marshall to remove the taser wires and probes still embedded in her body.
Here, lean forward a minute, guys. We're just trying to get all this stuff off of you.
She was taken away in an ambulance with injuries to her chest and neck and then charged with 2 counts of felony aggravated battery.
Police in schools leads to the criminalization of black and brown students and is a pipeline to the criminal justice system.
Andrew M. Stroth is Denigma's lawyer. He sued CPS and CPD on her behalf.
They claim she took a swing at them.
The officers on their reports falsified what happened.
He says the SROs involved, Officer Johnny Pierre and Officer Sherry Tripp, should have been the ones charged.
The police beat her, they threw her down the stairs, and then they turned to the dad and said, "Your daughter's going to jail." And on top of that, these officers falsified official reports that completely contradict the objective video evidence.
After the videos were released, both officers were removed from the school and disciplined. Johnny Pierre was given a 120-day suspension. Sherry Tripp a 2-day suspension. Charges against Denigma Howard were dropped, but she says that still did not stop her pain.
Do you still hurt?
Yeah.
Howard's lawsuit settled for $300,000. Her case led to the removal of dozens of SROs at Chicago public schools. We got our data from the federal government, but when we asked CPS for the same data, they turned over a file that didn't match what they told the federal government. As many as 5,000 police referral cases were missing, and they won't tell us why. Dave Savini, CBS 2 Investigators.
Extraordinary reporting. Joining us now on the stream, CBS 2 investigative reporter Dave Savini. Dave, you have been digging into the data involving policing in schools. And like you said in your investigation on Chicago public schools, kids with disabilities or IEPs are more likely to have police called on them, at least at Marshall High School. What did you find nationwide?
So Brad, one of the things we found in the data, this is mandatory reporting to the National Education Department and by all schools, they have to report the data of who is referred to police and who is arrested. So we looked at the 2017-2018 school year. That's the most recent year on record. And one of the startling things that we uncovered was that the data shows that if a student has an IEP, they are way more likely to have, not just at Marshall High School, but nationwide, they are more likely to have police called on them if they have some form of disability or some learning disability, which is an individualized education plan, an IEP, that's what that stands for. They're more likely to have police called on them. Take it down even further to grade schools, grammar schools, it's 5 times more likely that a child with an IEP will have police called on them. Denigma Howard at Marshall High School had an IEP, and one of the things it said in there was that they're supposed to call her father immediately when there's a problem at school to get her, under control when she maybe acts out. Like in this case, she was talking on her cell phone when she wasn't supposed to be, and then she ends up being hit and dragged down the stairs and then tasered. And as you saw in the other story in Rockford, Paris Moore, he was just wandering the hallways. We have learned that Paris also now has been diagnosed with not only brain trauma but an IEP as well. So you had an issue with Paris as well. So you can see some of the kids in need here are the ones being targeted by school police resource officers, Brad.
Dave Savini and the CBS 2 investigators started examining school resource officers after a student in Naperville took his own life. That student had just been interrogated by a school resource officer, and according to his family, was being interrogated without a parent present. The story you are about to see led to a new law requiring all student resource officers to be mandatorily trained.
Corey, honestly, it looks really good.
9 months after Corey Walgren did this cancer fundraiser, he committed suicide.
I knew he was in a panic. I knew he thought his whole life was over.
Maureen Walgren says her son killed himself, jumping off this parking garage after being interrogated by a Naperville North High School resource officer and dean.
When you see like a police officer there with his badge and gun, first thing you think is like you're gonna get handcuffed and go to jail.
This teen, whose name we are not using, says he was interrogated too, 3 months before Walgren's death.
They put the officer in the room to scare kids.
Both were questioned about what they supposedly had on their phones.
He basically told me that you're gonna be like a registered sex offender. You're going to be kicked off all the sports teams.
His phone was clean, nothing illegal. Corey Walgren was accused of having video from a consensual sex act. His mom explains what school officials said.
He can be charged as a sex offender and have to register as a sex offender.
Excuse me, Officer Hoyne. I'm Dave Savini from Channel 2.
Both families say Naperville police officer Brett Hoyne made the threats and interrogated the minors without their parents present.
Why do they have him in a room with the police officer? Why have they already questioned him? Why am I not there with him?
You weren't read your rights, and your parents weren't called.
Nope.
I've got numerous complaints from parents who say you're violating the rights of civil rights of students. Do you have anything to say about that?
No, I have no comment on that.
Michelle Mbecchiani-Wiley is a Shriver Center attorney and expert on school resource officers.
Students have civil rights. Your rights are not diminished as soon as you step foot in school grounds.
She says Illinois fails to require school districts and police departments to have specific rules on how the officer should operate in schools.
If it doesn't warrant a 911 call, then they should not be involved.
21 other states do require that type of agreement. Naperville's police and school district have a different kind. But Mbecchiani-Wiley says it lacks critical details, such as when a police officer should get involved and how the school protects a student's civil rights.
Soon after the funeral, they put it up.
Their son's jersey number now hangs above the rink he loved to play on. They say the school and police literally scared him to death.
The hardest part is just that we miss him. Just living without him.
Extraordinary reporting. CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini. Dave, thanks for joining us on the stream. Any developments in that last report, tragic report in Naperville?
Brad, that case that we exposed in Naperville involving Corey Walgren had a lot of developments. It led to a new law statewide that requires mandatory training and a certification for any police officer in any district, Chicago to Naperville, all the way downstate, even in Rockford, that they have to have training and be certified to deal with children in schools. You can't just take a police officer and detail them there without having specialized training.
Dave, let's jump to your first story now, out of Rockford. You were first to break the story exposing that head slam of Paris Moore. How is Paris doing now? You mentioned brain trauma.
Well, sadly, Brad, Paris is having a very difficult time adjusting to that injury. It is a permanent brain injury, and as you saw the pictures of the fracture in his skull on the left side of his head, that affected his memory, and that also affected his speech, and there are some personality traits that have changed with Paris Moore. He is withdrawn. He doesn't really leave his bedroom. He only comes out his grandmother and mother said, to maybe eat if he's told to come out and eat, and when he's told to shower. He actually hasn't even been in school for an entire year, Brad, because the family says he's too traumatized to return to that same school, which is often the case. You know, Denigma Howard in the Chicago Public School story, CPS had to move her to another school because she was too traumatized to return. That often happens. It leaves a scar on these children emotionally. So they have been demanding from the Rockford School District to put Paris in another school, and the only school that the Rockford is offering to send him to, which they just made an offer recently after we got involved, to send him to a school in Rockford that is has a very, very low graduation rate, and they really don't want him to go to that school.
CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini, remarkable work. Thank you for your work. Thank you for being a friend of the stream. I'm Brad Edwards. That's our special report. Now back to the stream.